So over the next 4 weeks, we will be dealing with each of the major sections in your MathsLive exams. Paper 1 is finance and data handling. I will chat about this more now in a second. And paper 2 is measurement, maths, and plans. And so hopefully, like I say, 4 weeks, in 4 weeks' time, you will be feeling comfortable, especially with the things in these sections that maybe aren't always our favorite types of questions. So as we go through these past papers and the notes and so on, I will sort of point out certain things to be aware of, such as how your questions will be marked, what sort of things you can look out for to put in your answers to ensure that you do get marked, what sort of mistakes are often made or commonly made so that you can avoid making those mistakes, and just hopefully make you better prepared to answer your MathsLive exams. All right, so does anyone have any questions before we get into it? Anything about how anything's going to run or anything like that?
No, ma'am. Everything's good.
Lovely. Okay, awesome. All right, so essentially what's going to happen, like I say, is we're going to work through past papers, and I've sort of specifically chosen very specific questions because A, they're the sections that we often struggle with, things like interest, income tax, etc. And B is also just questions where common mistakes are often made. And like I said, we're going to go through them. We're going to chat about how to approach them, what sort of mark allocations you're looking at, so that hopefully come your exams, you're going to feel confident. On the Google Classroom, I have uploaded a whole bunch more. So the questions that I'm doing now, I've just chosen from the notes that I provided for you guys. But there is a lot more in that document. And so please make sure that you do sort of use it as a resource. I hope that all of you are accessing past papers in any case. However, if you struggle to find resources or if you struggle to find past papers, I have in the document put some QR codes there that takes you to, I think there's 2 links there. That takes you to a bunch of past papers for any subject, which is really nice. So you can use those links for your other subjects as well. All the memos are there for you to go through and work with. And then another thing that I've put there for you guys, which I'm going to show you a little bit of now, is what we call the examination guidelines or the assessment guidelines for the subject. Again, sorry. These assessment guidelines, it's quite a lengthy document. I think it's about 25, 30 pages. And most of it you don't need to stress about. But what is really nice in this document is it gives you a breakdown of every section that you have been taught in MathsLive and what you are expected to know. All right, so I think it actually might even be worth me putting that up for you so that you can see what I'm talking about. It is there, and so I'm not going to go through it like at length, but it is a really, really nice document for you to go through so that you can see what is expected of you. All right, so if we just obviously I've now made the choice, you know. Okay. Yeah. So if we just have a quick look at this, and like I said, I'm not going through this whole thing. I'm going to just show you what I'm talking about when it comes to these important things. Right, so this is the document. Maybe make this a tad smaller so we can see what's happening. And it's actually 18 pages, so not as many as I thought. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you can go through, and that's fine. I'm going to go through some of it with you. But what's really nice is that 8 pages in, it starts to break down every single one of your topics that you have learned. So for example, we're doing finance today. For example, it tells you that within the section of financial documents and tariff systems, these are the 4 types of questions that we're going to ask you. I'll chat about these labels in a second. But you are expected to be able to deal with reading information directly from a financial document. You are expected to be able to do certain calculations when it comes to tariff systems, etc., etc. So this document is really, really nice because, like I say, it gives you a breakdown of exactly what you can expect in your exams. And it goes on for all of the topics that you've been taught pretty much since grade 10, but it goes through everything. I'll chat about this stuff in a second. It then also goes on to tell you each of, I suppose, the subtopics or subsections within the section that you've worked with. For example, financial documents, bills, till slips, banking documents, banking statements, electricity bills, all of that sort of thing you need to be comfortable with. So this document is really, really useful, particularly from page 8 to page 15, where it breaks down literally every single topic that you have done. It does seem like a lot of information, so I am aware of that. However, it is incredibly useful for you to know what is coming and for you to get comfortable with the types of questions that you're going to be asked and how this information or this content is actually going to be presented to you. So that document is linked on the notes that I have shared with you on Google Classroom. And I would advise you that as you start to study, you do take time to go through that document, even if you don't go through the whole thing in one go. But when you start studying, and let's say you're going to focus on finance initially or data handling or whatever the case is, go to that document and look at what you're expected to know. Look at the types of questions you're going to be asked, just so that you can sort of prepare yourself for what's coming. Right, many of you will also be writing common papers in these trial exams. A common paper is basically a paper that everyone writes. I'm sure you already know this, but it's a paper that everyone across the province or district or whatever the case is will be writing. Obviously, at the end of the year, you write a national paper, which will be the same across the whole of South Africa. And so it's also really important that you do go through these documents that have been set up by the people setting the exam so that you can see what it is they are going to put in the exams. Remember, it's very much the same people setting exams with the same group of people setting in the exams. And so the more you go through the documents, the more you go through past papers, the more you're going to realize that there is definitely a trend across all the papers that you can sort of expect. All right, so that is that document. It is incredibly useful, and please make use of it, particularly when you start to study. All right, the other thing I do just want to quickly chat to you about before we get into our actual content is what to expect in your papers. So firstly, this little table here on the right-hand side is the weighting of your sections per paper. Obviously, I've now made a choice to not put the sections there. You know, why on earth would I do that? I will write them in for you. But paper 1, 60% of your paper is finance. Please excuse my handwriting. I'm having a bit of an issue at the moment, but I'm going to do my best. 35% of your paper 1 is then data handling. 5% is probability. And what you're going to see is that probability actually comes onto both of the papers. So the bulk of paper 1 is finance. Paper 2, about 55-ish% is measurement. 40% is maps and plans. And another 5% probability. So in both papers, you will be examined on or asked questions on probability. These are generally very basic probability questions, nothing too crazy. Every now and then they might throw in something a bit more challenging, like a tree diagram or a contingency table, something like that. And we'll speak about all of those things when we do probability. But you can expect probability in both papers, but it is a very, very small portion of your paper. So for paper 1, which will be the first one that you write, well, most of it is finance. I'm also fully aware of the fact that some people love finance and some people hate finance. And that tends to mean that either you really do well in paper 1 or you don't do so well in paper 1, depending on the sections that you like. But realistically, guys, if you can get, I mean, even 70% of finance down, you are well on your way to doing well in paper 1. Okay, so that's just the weighting of each of your papers. Your papers are 150 marks, both in trial exams coming up now, as well as in finals. So you'll be sitting for 3 hours doing those exams. And what then becomes very important is your time management in those exams. And we'll chat about that a little bit more when we do our questions, and I'll chat about how you can manage your time efficiently in your paper. All right, so just that you can see in terms of what is expected of you. So here again, here's the weighting of your topics. It tells you exactly what I've just said, 60% finance, 30%, 35% on data, and then on the other side, maps and plans and so on. It gives you an idea of what you can expect. And then in each paper, your papers are always set up pretty much the same. So in paper one, you will have question one as level one questions. Level one questions are your basic questions. Read this information from a bank statement. Tell me how many people are involved in a specific survey. It is sort of the questions that everyone should be able to get. Those are your level one questions. Question two then focuses specifically on finance, question three on data handling, and sometimes question four, sometimes we add an extra question five, will then be an integration of finance and data. So there will be some sort of story, some sort of context given to you. For example, someone opens a business and you have to start answering slightly more complex questions involving finance as well as data. The same sort of thing happens in paper two. I'll speak more about this when we do paper two content. But this is again why going through that document is so important. You can start to see in exactly what to expect. When you walk into your first paper, you know that question one is going to be 30 marks that you can ace. You know that question two is going to focus on finance. You know that question three is going to focus on data handling, etc., etc. So it just gives you an idea of what to expect as you move through each of your papers. Generally speaking, your papers have about 4 or 5 questions. Never really anything more than that. Maybe 6, maybe, but generally 4 or 5 questions. And like you can see there, exactly what is expected in each question. Right, another little thing I do just want to point out, and I have put it in the notes for you, is that in 2020, the structure of the MathsLive exams changed. So what I mean by that is previously for both papers, you had to know everything. So before 2020, you had to know every single topic for both papers. Paper one was generally an easier paper with not as many complex level 4 questions, whereas paper two was then more questions that had the integrated context, the slightly harder questions that you would need to deal with. But as of 2020, there was a split in topics. So you no longer have to learn everything for both papers. You learn according to whichever paper you're writing. Now, the reason I want to point this out to you is that essentially means that you've got 4-ish years worth of exams, past paper exams, that deals with the content as you will see it in finals. If you use papers before 2019, they are still incredibly good resources for you to use. I do encourage you to still look at 2019, 2017, whatever, but just bear in mind that the paper structure was different. So what that means is you will see measurement questions in paper one. You will see finance questions in paper two. So it's just something for you to be mindful of. Again, I have made a note of it in the notes that I've put on Google Classroom for you. So it is there explaining this whole situation. That is just something that you need to be mindful of so that you don't panic when you see measurements in paper one. That is no longer how the papers are set up. The papers are set up according to this information here on the screen, which you can screenshot in a second if you want to. So just be mindful if you go prior to 2020, the structure of the paper was different and they have changed since then. But any paper that you look at from 2020 until pretty much last year will be exactly as you are going to see it in terms of the structure of the paper. All right, so guys, what I will do as I go along, particularly as we've done a question or whatever the case is, I will wait for you guys to screenshot information, answers, etc. So like now I'm just going to chat a little bit if you would like to take a screenshot of this. However, if I go too fast, please let me know. If I have explained something or said something that you don't quite understand or doesn't make sense, please let me know. You are welcome to just pop a message in the chat. You are welcome to raise your hand and ask questions at any point. The whole point is that you do ask questions, that you deal with any confusions that you might have, and hopefully by the end of it, you feel comfortable. Now, I'm fully aware finance, probably one of the biggest things in finance that we struggle with is income tax. So we definitely are going to get to that. And again, ask questions as we go along if you're not feeling super comfortable. All right, I've got the chat open. I can see when messages come through, so I'll answer them pretty much immediately unless I'm in the middle of a question or whatever the case is. And I can see when you raise your hands. So just ask. This is the whole purpose of this next, we're now at 17 minutes. The whole purpose is that you can ask your questions and you can deal with anything that you might be feeling a little uncertain by. Alrighty, I'm going to jump into it. And like I say, you just ask as we go along. At certain points, I will ask you questions and you can put your answers in the chat. You can unmute yourself, whatever the case is you feel most comfortable with. But the whole point is that you engage, you give me answers, you give me questions so that we are feeling confident with finance. All right. So the first question that I'm going to have a look at is from November 2021. I have specifically tried not to use anything from last year's final paper because that will be a good resource for you to use before you head into finals and trials. I have stolen some questions from the trial exams from last year, just so that you can kind of see what the standard was last year. But I haven't taken too much so that you don't have past papers that you can still access outside of what we do. All right, so this is from November 2021. This, just bear in mind, was the year after COVID. So the exams in 2020, 2021, there was a whole bunch of stuff happening. Basically, some content was cut, some content was added. Maths was actually one of the few subjects that nothing really changed. So the standard is pretty decent and pretty consistent across MathsLive, which is good. But it is the year after COVID, so it is always something just to take into consideration. Some of the exams were much harder after COVID. Some of the exams were still sort of level on par. Just something for you to bear in mind as you also do look at other subjects, past papers. All right, what you guys will also notice is that I'm not going to do any question 1 questions, mostly because question 1 was level 1. So they are the basic easy questions that you guys can all do. But obviously, if you go through a past paper and you feel like I'm not actually too sure what's happening here, you can put a message on the Google Classroom as well, and I'm more than happy to help you there as we go along. All right, so question 2 said, Mrs. Smith would like to buy a car but does not have the full cash amount. She downloaded 2 payment options for 2 different cars as shown in the table. Now, guys, before you sort of jump into your questions, make sure that you understand everything that has been presented to you in the information. So make sure you understand what you are reading with each of these values in this table. It will make your life easier, and you do get reading time at the beginning of your exam. So when you are reading, don't just flip through the exam and think, oh gosh, this question looks so horrible. Actually read your questions and make sure that you understand what's going on. It allows you to feel comfortable as you head into a question because you've seen it before and your brain has actually already started to process the information that's already read. And it also allows you to identify the questions where you think you may struggle. So if you had read, say, for example, question 2.1 and you thought, oh, okay, this is not going to be my best question, it means that you can leave it to a point in your paper where you feel comfortable or confident enough to tackle it. All right, so if we have a look, we've got the retail or the cash price. So this is how much the car would cost if you paid cash up front, no deposit, no need to take out a loan. You just paid the 215,100 Rand and you got your car. Right, the deposit is how much we pay up front. Many things that we buy on loan or in a loan scenario will require a deposit. So for the Ford, it's 5%, and for the Polo, it is 0%. Now, importantly, your deposit is always in relation to your cash price. So if you are asked to determine the deposit for the Ford Figo, it will always be 5% of the cash price or whatever percentage of the cash price. So when we do, or if we have to do that calculation, just always remember that you need to be working out based on your cash price. We then have a monthly installment. Now, your monthly installment is if you take out a loan to buy this vehicle or to buy an item, how much you will pay every single month. And then we have a residual value. All right, now I remember this question from 2021 because I remember afterwards my kids came out and they're like, what's a residual value? I don't understand. So a residual value is basically the amount that you would have left at the end of your loan period. What often happens when you take out a loan is that you don't actually end up paying the same monthly amount in the last month. What often ends up happening is that you end up paying slightly more or slightly less. It depends on your loan arrangement and your loan agreement. But it essentially is a slightly different, often slightly higher amount that needs to be paid in order to ensure that the entirety of the loan that you have taken out is actually paid off with all the interest. So if you think about residual, residue, leftover, it's what we have left to pay to ensure that we actually own this car and don't owe any money on it. We then have a monthly admin fee. And again, it's important to take note of what this is calculated on if it's a percentage. So for the Polo, it's 2.08% of the monthly installment. So we would have to go back to our monthly installment and work out 2.08% of that if we were required to do so. And then we have a term agreement. Now, your term agreement is essentially the period of your loan. The period of your loan is how much time you have to pay it off. So for the Ford, we've got 72 months. And for the VW Polo, you have 48 months. Can anyone tell me how many years 72 months is?
Is it 3 years?
Unless I can't do that. Okay, so how many months are in a year?
12.
Good. Okay, so we've got 12 months in 1 year. So what that means is if we want to work out how many months we have, how many years we have in 72 months, we would take 72 and divide that by 12. So that actually gives us 6 years. So this loan period or this term agreement is 6 years. Can anyone tell me then how many years 48 months is?
Four years.
Lovely. Okay, so we've got two very different periods here in terms of the loan. One is 6 years, one is 4 years. Those are generally how long a car loan lasts. It's very rarely even more than 6, sometimes 7, generally between 4 and 5. Okay, and then we've got VAT. Can anyone tell me what VAT stands for?
Value added
Lovely.
tax.
Value added tax. Okay, so VAT is charged on almost every single item that we purchase. There are a few items that are VAT exempt. Often these items are foodstuffs and are then the basic foodstuffs. So what I mean by basic foodstuffs is you won't be charged VAT on things like rice, eggs, milk, bread, certain types of bread. If it's a basic foodstuff and it would require or you require it to remain nutritious and healthy, often there isn't VAT added to it. Okay, none of your papers should have a different VAT amount, but please remember VAT is 15%. Obviously, this is correct, but if you go into older past papers, VAT might still be at 14%. You will always work with VAT at 15%. If we do not give you the VAT percentage, we expect you to know that VAT is 15%. So please don't ever work with any other percentage other than 15%. Okay, so we have now actually analyzed this entire situation, and we can now head into our questions. So it says use the table. It doesn't say use the table. It says use table 2 above in order to answer the questions that follow. So the first question is asking us, and I feel like this is a rather excessive zoom that I've chosen here. So let's just do that. The first question asks us to state what type of payment option is shown in table 2. Right, so what type of payment plan do we use if we are going to pay off an item via monthly repayments with a deposit, etc., etc.? Who can remember what that would be?
Would it be ATM?
Okay, so just remember an ATM is if we were to withdraw cash from our bank or if we were to deposit cash. So it deals more with I suppose
Higher purchase. Is it higher purchase?
Yeah, nice. Okay, good. So this
Okay.
would be a higher, sorry guys, my handwriting is still suspect, isn't it? Right, hire purchase. You could have also set a credit option, so you're buying on credit, which basically means that you don't necessarily have the money immediately, but you can essentially buy your item and then repay it over a certain amount of time. So you could have said hire purchase, you could have said credit option. Either of those would have been absolutely acceptable. Okay, so just remember hire purchase. You learned about in grade 9 as well for the first time, but it's essentially you buying an item on loan. That's really all hire purchase is. Okay, another thing that's really nice in MathsLive, guys, is you'll never see a 1-mark question. So you just being able to write down a hire purchase or a credit option, that is worth 2 marks, which is lovely because 2 marks in 150 papers is already 1% that you've earned yourself. So that's why those question 1 questions, those level 1 questions, you can bank on 30% automatically just by reading carefully and answering those questions appropriately. Right. 2.1.2 asks us to calculate the deposit amount for the forward figure. Right, so the forward figure told us, or the advertisement told us that for our forward figure, we need to work with 5% deposit. Now remember, this is always of your cash price, so you would work out 5%, which is 5 over 100, times your cash price of 215,100 Rand. Now, how you choose to write this down is up to you. Obviously, if you just wanted to write 5%, that's absolutely fine. You don't have to write 5 over 100. But what is important is that when you type it in on your calculator, you need to remember to take into account that it is a percentage. Your calculator does have a percentage button. I can't for the life of me remember where that percentage button is now. Let's bring up a calculator to make sure that we know. Okay, the percentage button is on top of the open bracket. So it's in yellow, so you could say shift percentage. That's absolutely fine. Alternatively, you type it in as 5 over 100 on your calculator. It makes no difference as long as you remember it is a percentage. If you just type 5 times 215,100, you're going to get a very, very weird answer. Right, but our deposit here is 10,755 Rand. Guys, once you've paid a deposit, will this deposit form part of your loan amount? So once you've paid that amount, will it form part of the loan amount?
I want to say yes.
Okay, let's think of it another way. If you've already paid this money, should they be charging you interest on something you've already paid?
No.
No.
Okay, excellent, nice. All right, so once your deposit has been paid, if you wanted to work out your loan amount, what we would do is we would take our cash price and we would minus our deposit. Because as I've just said, they cannot charge you interest on something you've already paid. If you have paid that deposit, they are not legally allowed to charge you interest on an amount you've paid. And so this is also why paying a deposit is so useful, just as like life world advice. If you can pay a deposit when you're buying something like a house or a car or a major appliance or something like that, that you know you're going to purchase on loan, try and pay as big a deposit as possible. Because what that means is that you end up owing less money because you will subtract your deposit. And it means that you actually end up paying back less interest because you have managed to pay more upfront. So deposit is a really good thing to be able to do if you are going to buy something on loan. All right, so our loan amount, like I say, you would have to, what am I trying to say? Deduct your deposit before you actually go and calculate the interest, because legally you cannot be charged interest on something you have already paid. Right, 2.1.3 then asks us to write down a simplified ratio or ratio in simplified form of the term agreement of the Ford Vigo to the VW Polo. Now, this might seem a very silly thing, but the order in which they give you the items, in this case, the 2 cars, must be the order in which you write your answer. So the Ford Figo's term period was 72 months and the VW Polo's period was 48 months. If you had swapped it, unfortunately, you are going to lose marks. And again, it sounds so silly, but a ratio's order is incredibly important. If I told you that you needed to mix, let's say, for example, ORAS in a ratio of 3:1, but I didn't tell you what the 3 represented and what the 1 represented, you might end up adding 3 liters of ORAS and 1 liter of water and then end up with a very, very sweet drink. So the order in which we give you items, values, whatever, in a ratio is incredibly important. Right, this is also why I asked you earlier on how many years does 72 months and 48 months represent? Because now we can start to simplify. We know that this is 6 months, 6 years, and this is 4 years. And we can simplify that even further because both of these are divisible by 2. 3 is 2. And so what I want to point out here is that please don't feel that you need to simplify straight away. Go first to the years situation if it's a case of time, and then simplify further from there if you need to. Alternatively, cheat, use your calculator. If you type 72 divided by 48 on your calculator will give you 3/2. This ratio is exactly what we want. And so you can just write it like that. So your calculator will always give you the simplified form. And if you aren't too sure, just type it into your calculator. No one's going to know. All right, so your calculator does it for you automatically. The only thing you then need to remember is to write it as a ratio. Don't leave it as a fraction. Again, unfortunately, marks would be deducted. All right, so the next question says, which one of the two vehicles would be most cost effective or more cost effective in terms of monthly budget? So I'll give you guys a second to have a look again at those two payment options, and you can let me know which one you think would be more cost effective month to month. So when they say on a monthly budget, they're asking every single month if you had to make these payments, which would be most cost effective for you? Okay, so remember, we've got two monthly payments. One is 2,999 Rand, one is 3,345 Rand. Which is the most cost effective month to month, do we think?
Would the Ford Figo be the most cost effective?
Why?
Because it costs a lot less compared to the VW Polo.
Lovely, exactly. All right, so when you get questions like this, guys, don't overthink it. We're not trying to trick you. So quite literally, exactly as you just said, it costs less. Less? It costs less. You don't want to have to pay, like you say, almost an extra 350 Rand a month if you don't have to. Yes, the trade-off is that you have to now pay it off over 6 years rather than 4 years. But if you take into account your monthly budget, this amount of 2,999 Rand may be way more effective. And so, yes, our Ford Figo would be the case. Now, the reason I asked why is because sometimes these questions have an added give a reason for your answer or justify your answer, explain your answer. And you do actually need to do that. So if it had said explain your answer, you would give the reasoning of it is a lot less, 346 Rand less each month. Okay, and again, please make sure you do actually explain it because one of these 2 marks will be for your explanation. Sometimes if we ask you to explain, we actually bump this up to 3 marks. And it'll be 1 mark for the option you choose, so Ford Figo, and then 2 marks for your explanation. So make sure you do actually give an explanation if required. Okay, so they sort of eased us in. None of these questions have been super, super tricky just yet. But now we start to get to the calculations. Now we start actually needing to use the information given and answer some calculation questions. And this is now where we start leveling up our questions. Right, at this point, I just want to point something out to you. All of the questions so far have been 2 markers. However, all of a sudden, they've now thrown a 6-mark question at us because, you know, someone was having a bad day clearly. So 6 marks. Firstly, remember that in MathsLit, we are generous with marks. So what I mean by that is you might quite literally get a mark for writing down the correct value. Not even doing a calculation yet, writing down the correct value. I will show you the mark allocation once we've done this question. But do not let a 6, 8, I've never seen more than 8. I think the most I've seen is 8 marks. Don't let those mark allocations scare you. All right? We are generous with marks in MathsLit. Generally speaking, anything more than 3 or 4 marks should require a bit more working out. It shouldn't be a case of you just write down an answer. There should be some sort of working out, but don't let it scare you. You shouldn't have half a page necessarily of working out. The other thing I want to point out here is your time allocation. I don't know how many of you have ever heard this. Maybe it was more in my time sort of thing. But I was always told that when you are writing a paper, you go a mark a minute. So this is a 6 marker. So we should not be spending more than 5 to 6 minutes on this question. If you are, it means that your time management in your paper is not going very well. So this is another thing in your reading time. In your reading time, take note of the mark allocations for your question. I wouldn't go question by question. Maybe the whole of question 1 is 30 marks. Don't spend longer than half an hour on it. The whole of question 2 is, I don't know, 47 marks. Don't spend longer than about 45, 50 minutes on it. If you keep your time management relatively consistent, it generally means that you will have 10, 15 minutes at the end of the check to make sure that you're comfortable with all of the answers that you've given and to ensure that when you hand in your paper, you're super comfortable and super confident with everything you've handed in. All right, so the 6 marker, we shouldn't spend longer than 6 minutes on it, but let's see what happens. So 2.1.5 says calculate the total cost of the VW Polo if the monthly installment is repaid the same throughout, remained the same as the 3,400 and 3,345 rand. Sneak that in there. Remain the same for the contract period except for the final payments. Remember that was that residual value. And then what's quite nice is they give us a formula. So again, don't panic at 6 marks. I've actually given you a nice clue of what you can do. We just want to basically substitute into this formula and get a final answer. I decided to minimize the whole thing. Right, so let's scroll up and see what's happening here with VW. Sorry guys, my page hasn't decided that today's the day. All right. Can you guys all still hear me? Just let me know if you can hear me still.
Yes, ma'am.
Cool.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, guys. You know, you would think technology would be on my side, but nope. Alrighty, so we're VW Poloing. Now, we have been given a formula, like I say, and so don't overthink it. Go to the formula and essentially make sure you get all of these values. So the first thing that we need to substitute in here is the total value of our monthly installments. Now, this is where we need to go back and we need to go, okay, cool. This was my monthly installment, and this was the number of months I paid that amount for. So if we wanted the total monthly installment, what we would need to do is we would need to take the amount we paid every single month, 3,345 rand, and times it by the number of months we paid it for. That will give me what I paid in total over 4 years. Right, so that's the first thing that we need to do. It's also not 48 because, you know, losing my mind. 47, and I'll tell you why it's 47 now. Hopefully we remember. Remember, residual value, it's the last month's payment
So the 48th month, we paid that 116,759 Rand. So yes, the total period was 48 months, but in the last month, I paid more to ensure that I paid off my loan. So when it comes to this residual value down at the end here, that is the 116,759 Rand, which we will substitute in. So just take note of the fact that because we had that residual value, like I said, it's often the last payment that you make that is often a little bit more to make sure that your loan is paid off. So this 3,345 Rand is for 47 months because the last month had the residual payment. Then we had the admin fee, and remember, if we scroll back up, this was the 2,08% of the monthly installment. So we need to work out 2,08%, be 2,08 over 100 of the 3,345 Rand. And if we add all of those things together in my beautiful handwriting, that is just, making everyone envious here, we will get our total cost. Now, what's really important, grade 12s, is I don't really need to see you doing all of this working out step by step. You are more than welcome to, but you're going to see now when I show you the mark allocation, you're not going to get a mark for telling me that 3,345 times 47 is 157,215 Rand. You can just type this whole thing into your calculator. Show me that you have done the appropriate calculations, that you have multiplied by 47 and worked out 2,08%, but I don't actually need to see the amounts. Again, you can show them if you want. So 2,08% of 3,345 Rand is 69 Rand 85 cents. And then obviously we have our balloon payment. But I don't need to see the step. That is not important for you to show. What is obviously important for you to show is your final answer. Okay, my next question for you guys. This is, like I say, 2,08% of a monthly installment. Do you pay an admin fee every month, or do you think you pay it only once? And if we go back up to the table, you can have a look at what it says there. So is that admin fee a once-off payment, or is it every single month?
Once-off payment.
Okay, let's have a look. So we've got 2,08% of the monthly installment, and just careful, it says monthly admin fee. So basically what that means is that every single month I pay that amount.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and this is, I think, also sometimes why these questions can be so overwhelming. There's so much information squished into this tiny table that sometimes we just don't see everything. And that's why I said at the start, just take some time and read through it carefully and make sure that you're comfortable. Okay, so it's a monthly admin fee, which means we paid every single month that we pay that monthly amount of 3,445. So what we need to do with this amount is we need to times it by those 47 months, because I don't just pay it once, I pay it 47 times. All right, so we are adding together the total of our monthly payments. We are adding together the total of my admin fees, so the 69 Rand 85 cents times 47, and that gives me 3,270 Rand 26 cents, and we are adding that residual amount. Again, you can put this all into your calculator, and if you wanted to take this times 47 and put it into the bracket at the same time, absolutely. Just don't forget, it's every month. And so we finally get that the total amount that we would have to pay if we wanted the VW Polo is 277,244 Rand 26 cents. Now, if you compare that to the amount that the Polo initially cost, 220,300, we are paying over 40,000 Rand more for this car. I'm so sorry if you can hear that. We are paying over 40,000 Rand more for this car because of the fact that we're buying it on loan. Anytime you buy something on loan, you're going to end up paying more for it because of the interest. All right, so let's just have a look at this mark allocation so that you can see what's happening. You would get a mark for calculating your monthly admin fee. You would get a mark for multiplying your monthly amount by 47. You would get a mark for multiplying your admin fee by 47. You would get a mark for adding all of your answers together. You would get a mark, obviously, for your final answer. How many marks have I got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5. And you would get a mark for remembering to add that residual value. And this is what I was talking about earlier. This is quite literally you reading that amount off the table. So you are getting a mark for correctly copying down an amount from your table. That's your 6 marks. Nowhere have you been allocated marks for like the calculated values. It's quite literally that you remember to do all of the calculations. Atya?
Ma'am, I'm not getting the same answer that you got.
Oh, heavens above. Which one?
So I got for the same one, but I got 277,256.95.
Are all your other values the same?
215.
No, I get the same thing as you. Oh no, someone's memo was wrong. 256, 227,256.
Yes, ma'am.
Ooh, Department of Education had a bit of a day there, clearly. Okay, 95 cents. See, guys, even they make mistakes. On that, nice little caveat here. If they make a mistake in the paper, it will never affect you badly. You will always, the marks will always be adjusted. So like something like this, hopefully, they would have realized their error in the marking process, and obviously that would be corrected. If a question was wrong or if it was ambiguous or something like that, you are always given the benefit of the doubt. You are not going to be penalized for someone else's mistake, if that makes sense. Thank you for being on top of it. Yeah, someone in the department is having a bad day. All right, I can see your hands up. If you can just let me know what your name is, that's...
Oh, my name is Amara.
Amara, thank you.
Yes, but I just wanted to double check with finance, do we ever round up the answer? Or is it only in some circumstances?
It will only be in some circumstances if they've asked you to round to the nearest rand.
Okay.
But generally speaking, always 2 decimal places.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, pleasure. Rounding becomes a little more important in paper 2 with measurement. So, for example, and we'll chat more about this when we do measurement, but if, for example, you were asked to buy materials or something, I don't know, you needed to buy paint, and you worked out that you needed 7.25 tins of paint. In that case, you would round up to 8 tins because you can't buy a quarter of a tin. You can buy 1 tin or you can buy 2 tins. And so if the context sort of lends itself to it doesn't make sense for you to have the decimal, then you would round up. But finance, 2 decimal places unless we tell you otherwise. Okay, good question. Because rounding is also very important in MathsLive. Okay, nice, guys. Well done. Any questions on 2.1.5? It does seem we've asked them, but any more?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am.
Lovely. Alrighty, so if we look at 2.1.6, it says Mrs. Smith invested 60,000 Rand at a bank for 2 years with compound interest. Okay, so what is compound interest? And if you can't tell me that straight away, could you tell me what the difference between compound and simple interest is?
Ma'am, with compound interest, your amount always increases.
Okay, when you say your amount, what amount do you mean?
The investment amount. So like in this question, it would be the 60,000 Rand.
Okay, good. So compound interest, and actually in life, we generally work with compound interest. There are very, very few scenarios in life where we ever work with simple interest, except for hire purchase loans and dodgy backstreet loans. Okay, I'll explain why in a second, but generally compound interest. So compound interest is basically interest on interest. Exactly as Atya said now. Once you have earned interest on your amount, that gets put into your account. And for the next year, they will now calculate interest on that new bigger amount. So you can earn more interest. And then the next year, it's on a bigger amount and bigger and bigger. And this is how your investment grows. Simple interest is only ever calculated on the starting amount. So in this scenario, if this was simple interest, you would only ever earn interest on the 60,000 Rand. So what that means is you only earn the same amount of interest every single year because it doesn't get calculated on a bigger amount each time. Most loans are compound interest, which is also really nice because what it means is as you pay off more of your loan, you end up paying more interest because the amount that you owe decreases, which means that your next interest calculation is calculated on the smaller amount and smaller and smaller and smaller. Right? Simple interest, because it's only ever on the initial amount, it means that that interest never changes. So this is why, like dodgy loan sharks will use simple interest. Because if, let's say, you borrowed like 100,000 Rand from them, you're constantly going to be paying off 100,000 Rands worth of interest, not the smaller and smaller amount as you pay it off. So that's what compound interest is. Quick side note, I'm hoping none of you, but let me ask the question. Have any of you, or were you taught to use compound interest and simple interest formulas? Or have you never used the formula?
Yes, I've been taught, ma'am.
Okay. All right. So,
No, ma'am.
okay, right.
Me neither.
Okay, I was hoping for me neither. So, Amara, it's not the end of the world. What I am going to say, though, is that MathsLit, for whatever reason, I can't tell you why they don't like it because we've literally just done a question that deals with the formula, but for whatever reason, MathsLit does not like students using the formulas. And generally speaking, if you make even one single mistake in your calculation, they will mark you wrong. You'll get 0, which seems incredibly harsh. And this is why I'm saying I don't quite understand where this logic came from. But when we do interest calculations, we actually expect you to do it without a formula. So I'm going to show you how to do it that way. If you are like 10,000% comfortable and confident with your formulas, they will mark you correct. But like I say, the second you make one teeny tiny little mistake, you're going to get 0. All right. So generally speaking, we don't actually teach interest with the formulas. It's not the end of the world if you've learned the formula. Like I said, just be super, super confident with it. But I am going to show you how to do it where you don't need to use a formula at all. Okay, so we've got her 60,000 Rand, compound interest. In the first year, she received an interest rate of 4.32% per annum. While in the second year, she received an interest rate of 5.1% per annum. Mrs. Smith stated that she would have enough money at the end of the second year to pay the residual value of the Ford Figo. Okay, lovely. Let's just go check what that residual value was. The residual value on our Ford Figo was 30%. So that's nice. 30% of what? So we would need to go and figure that out. Remember, we always relate these percentages back to our cash price. So it would be 30% of the 215,100. So let's just make a little note for ourselves. 30% of 215,100. That's the residual amount. Verify, showing all calculations whether her statement is correct. Right. Because this is a question that says verify, so basically prove whether or not she's right or wrong. One of those 8 marks will be for you saying at the end, yes, she's correct, or no, she's incorrect. Anytime you're asked to verify or prove through calculation or something like that, if you have to show whether or not a statement is correct or not, you will always be allocated a mark for making that final statement. So it would be so silly to do all 7 calculation marks correct and then forget to actually verify. So again, just bear that in mind as you go along. All right, but let's get into it. So this is how you would do it without the formula, and if possible, try and do interest calculations without the formula, just because I don't know, someone had a bad day with a formula and just decided no to formulas. All right, so when we do these calculations, unfortunately, it is a case of you go year by year. So in year 1, she earned 60,000 Rand. She earned interest on her 60,000 Rand of 4.3%. So we need to work out what 4.3% of 60,000 Rand is. That gives us an interest amount of 2,580 Rand. So in 1 year, she earned that amount of interest, which means at the end of year 1, she had 60,000 plus the 2,580 Rand. So she now had in her account 62,580 Rand. Now, as we said earlier, because it's compound interest, this is now the amount I use to calculate my interest in my second year. So in year 2, we are going to now use the new interest rate of 5.1, but we are going to work out 5.1% of our new amount of 62,580. So 5.1%, and that gives us 3,191 Rand 58 cents. So this is the interest. I'll label this in a second for us. So at the end of year 2, she had what she had after year 1, 62,580 Rand, plus the interest she's earned from year 2, 3,191 Rand 58 cents. So in total, at the end of her 2 years, she now has 65,771 Rand 58 cents. Right, so just quickly to go through what we've just done, just that we're all on the same page. We work out the interest. So this amount over here is the interest after 1 year. Because that interest has been earned, it is paid back to the customer. So this is why we add it to the 60,000 and we get her essentially accumulated amount after a year. Because it's compound interest, we now use that new amount to work out the next year's interest. And again, this would be the interest amount. And because that's interest paid back to Mrs. Smith, we add it to what was already in the account, the 62,580. And what we now have is that after 2 years at those 2 different interest rates, she has the 65,771 Rand 58 cents in her account. So we know how much she has. Now we actually need to go and figure out whether or not it will be enough to pay that residual value. And this is now where we need to go work out 30% of our 215,100. So 30% of that amount gives us 64,530, calculating correctly. And now we can make our comparison. So who can tell me, does she have enough money to pay her residual amount?
Yes.
Lovely. Okay. So because the residual amount is less than what she has in the account, or you could look at it the other way, because she's got more in her account than her residual value, we can say, yes, she is correct. And like I say, guys, you quite literally saying, yes, she's correct, or even she is correct is one of those 8 marks. All right, so because this is quite a chunky mark allocation here, let's see how these marks would be calculated. So there would be a mark for you understanding that you needed to work out 4.3% of the 60,000 and a mark for that interest amount. You would then get a mark for adding the interest onto the 60,000. So that's 3 of your 8 marks already. You then get another mark down here for calculating with your new interest value and a mark for getting your amount after the 2 years. So that's already 5 marks. So just that calculation of interest is 5 marks. You then will also get a mark for calculating the 30% of the 215,100 and getting what the residual value is. There's those 7 of the 8 marks. And like I said, the final mark will always be, yes, she is correct, no, he's incorrect, whatever the case is, you actually verifying the statement. So like I said earlier, the bulk of your marks is quite literally coming from you doing the calculations. The final statement obviously is important, and it would be silly to lose that 1 mark, but that final statement is only 1 mark. You're getting marks everywhere else. All right, any questions? So like I say, guys, when you're doing interest calculations, you actually want to do it year by year, especially for compound interest. Simple interest is a little easier because of the fact that simple interest, the interest amount never changes. What you would do, let's actually just take a little side note. This was simple interest for 2 years. We'll just work with 2 years because there's no need to do more. And let's just keep it at 4.3%. We're not going to use the second one. What you would do is you would work out 4.3% of your amount, so of your 60,000, which we already know the value of. It was 2,580. And once you have your interest, you basically just times that by the number of years. So even if I'd said simple interest for 40 years, you would times that by 40 because your interest amount never changes. So in this case, we would just times it by 2 years, which would give you 5,160. I'm doing that in my head, so I could be off, but 5,160, I'm like 99% confident. And then all you do is you add that to your initial amount. So 60,000 plus 5,160. That's how you work with simple interest. You just times it by your number of years and it being your interest amount. You can also see here why compound interest is actually way more beneficial. We've got a lot more in our account, 65,701 Rand, versus if we had gone simple interest. And that's why compound interest is so beneficial, because you earn interest on interest. All right, so guys, try as far as possible not to use your formulas, just because, like I said, one mistake, unfortunately, they mark you wrong, which I think is incredibly harsh, but I'm also no one important when it comes to these sorts of things. It's just unfortunately something that they do. So try and do it without a formula, if possible. All right. Does anyone need me to go back to anything? If you want to take screenshots, anything like that?
No, ma'am.
Okay, cool. All right. So the next question is relatively straightforward. So I'm not like super concerned. I am just going to jump to the income tax question, mostly because I also know that this is something that we don't always feel super comfortable with. I'm going to be honest, it took me a good 2 years when I first started teaching MathsLive to be comfortable with income tax. So I completely understand, but you are guaranteed an income tax question. And so I'd rather be able to do it and feel comfortable with it than see an income tax question and want to cry. All right. So this was from the trial exam 2 years ago. I'll come back to the other question if we've got time, but this was from the trial exam 2 years ago. And like I said, you are guaranteed an income tax question. Just accept it now, internalize that fact, and it's going to happen. Right, so for myself and for my little kitty witties when I was doing income tax, or when I do income tax rather, I came up with this little flow diagram. It does seem quite excessive because there are 8 steps to follow, but it really breaks it down when you're doing income tax. Now, there are variations of what we can throw at you when it comes to income tax. And I will chat about those slight variations as we go through these questions. But again, guys, income tax is coming. You have to accept that, and we need to be able to do it. Out of interest, how many of you are comfortable with income tax?
No, ma'am.
Not me, ma'am.
Me neither.
Lovely. Okay, so we're all in the same boat. Like I say, it took me a good 2 years to be comfortable with it. And then they also decided to change the way they taught income tax on me. So it was like another year before I felt comfortable again. So don't stress. We're all in the same boat. But I promise you, if you follow these steps, it becomes easier. All right. So let's have a look at this super fun scenario that we have here, and we'll go from there. So That's not Mrs. It's Ms. Ms. Nande is a 53-year-old and earns a gross income of 39,486 Rand per month during the 2021-2022 tax year. Now, this is not important for you to know, but fun fact, the tax year runs from the 1st of March to the 28th of February the following year. Who made that choice? I'm not too sure why. They really needed to make better choices, but that is when the tax year runs. Can't tell you why. All right, so first things first, it's always important for us to know the age of the person who is going to pay tax. Reason being is because depending on your age, you get a rebate. A rebate is money back, essentially. The older you get, the more rebates you get. I'll talk about the rebates when we look at that in the table. But basically, as you get older, you get more money back from SARS. The next important piece of information for us to, because that made sense in life. Sorry, I minimized it again. The next important bit of information for us to know is how much they earn, okay? They earned a gross income of 39,486 Rand per month. Now, that per month thing is very important. These tax tables work in annual rates, all right? So this table over here refers to an annual amount, a yearly amount. And so that's really important for us to know because we would then need to work out her annual gross income, which we'll get to in a second, during the tax year. Lovely, lovely. It then goes on to say a non-taxable monthly deduction of 7.5% was made from her salary and paid into her pension fund. Okay, so in South Africa, this is actually not how it works. I think it's a maximum of like 27.5% or something in the real world that you can contribute towards your pension without being taxed on. However, in MathsLive, we work with 7.5%. So what this means is that for the 7.5% that she contributes to her pension fund, she is not taxed on that. Now, the reason is your pension fund is supposed to set you up for retirement or supposed to set you up for a point in your life where you aren't earning a full income. And you can then rely on that money to sort of see you through and make ends meet. So you are not taxed on a certain portion that you contribute towards your pension fund. However, if Mrs. I don't know why I keep saying Mrs. However, if Miss Nande contributed, let's say, for example, 20% towards her pension fund, what that would mean is that the first 7.5% is non-taxable, but the remaining, and obviously now I've shot myself on the foot because I have to work out, the remaining 12.5% would be taxable. So this is one of the little things we could throw at you. We could give you a pension percentage that is greater than 7.5%. But all you need to remember is that your pension is a maximum of 7.5%. So when we get to this flow diagram, that'll be important. So like I say, if we had said it was 20%, you would just take off the 7.5% so that you don't calculate tax on it. Everything else, however, is taxed, right? That's just how SARS chooses to do it. All right, so now we've got all of this information. We need to go into our tax tables. So this first table, table 4, you never need to remember any of this. These tax tables change every single year. It is unreasonable and unrealistic for you to remember any of it. You will always be given the tax table, always. And so you don't need to stress about remembering. The only thing you need to stress about doing is understanding or being able to place your income in one of your tax brackets and then read off the appropriate formula. That is the only thing you need to stress about when it comes to these tax brackets. I will talk about the formulas more when we actually use them. The next table that you need to know is the tax rebates. So like I say, this is money that SARS gives you back. It's kind of like, thank you so much for paying your taxes. You're a good person. We'll see you again next year. That's all a rebate is. Now, you get 3 rebates from SARS, primary, secondary, and tertiary. Now, Ms. Nande is 53 years old. So unfortunately for her, she only qualifies for the primary rebate. So she was 53. I'm trying to like color coordinate here so we know what's going on. So she only gets the primary rebate. It's a fair amount of money. That is unfortunately an annual amount, which is not fun. But anyways, it is a significant amount. And so she's going to get that money back. If, however, Miss Nande was, I don't know, 72 years old, she would qualify for both the primary and the secondary rebate. So she gets both of them. Reason being is by that point, so after 65, most employers have a retirement age of between 62 and 65 years old. So after 65, generally you are retired, which means you're not earning as much of an income, which means that you do need as much money as possible coming back to you so that you can live month to month. If she was, I don't know, 83, she would get the primary, the secondary, and the tertiary. She would get all three rebates. So rebates are additive. If you are older than a certain age, you get whatever rebate you're on as well as the ones before. Miss Nande, unfortunately, 53 years old, she only gets a primary rebate because she is younger than 65. All right, so that's what you need to understand. Another thing that they sometimes give you is medical aid. I'll chat about medical aid in a second, but medical aid is a separate table, and it's basically you just work with the amounts that you've been given. However, the one thing I will say with medical aid is that for whatever reason, again, I don't know who made this choice. I don't know why they made this choice, but the medical aid table is often given to you per month. Okay, so medical aid is often given as a monthly amount. Why they chose to do this when everything else from SARS is annual, I don't know, is monthly. So what that means is that you would have to times your medical aid rebate by 12 to get the annual amount. Because like I say, everything in tax works with an annual amount. Atia?
Ma'am, with the medical aid, I think it was in my last term's paper where they gave us, like in the question where where the tax bracket and that is, they said what the medical aid amount is, but then they gave a medical aid table also. So do we go with the amount that they give in the information, or do we calculate our own medical aid amounts?
So did it say medical aid or did it say medical expenses? Well, I'm asking.
I think it said medical aid.
Okay, so if it told you the medical aid, then you could probably go with that amount. It might have been them just trying to help you out. Generally, what we will do though is in the information we will say Ms. Nande is on medical aid and her husband and her 2 children are on her medical aid, because in the medical aid table there is an amount for the primary member or the main member, an amount for the first dependent, which would then be your husband, and then amounts for every other dependent thereafter, and we then use that accordingly. So if medical aid is going to be considered, we generally say who is on the medical aid and how many people are on the medical aid.
Okay.
Okay, but if they give you an amount, you can use that. Obviously, they were trying to help you out a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, cool. All right, so guys, this is what we have. Like I say, for whatever reason, someone made a choice. I think it was the wrong choice, but they made a choice that medical aid is going to be monthly. So the only thing you just need to remember is medical aid, you would have to times by 12 to get that that rebate off your medical aid. Again, the reason you get rebates off your medical aid is because you are if you're part of medical aid, and obviously this is a huge assumption made by government, you are then generally paying for your own medical care and you're not relying on like government funding or anything like that. So it's also kind of like a thank you so much for being part of medical aid. Here's a rebate. All right, so let's get into the questions. The first one says, explain the term gross income in this context. So does anyone know what gross income is? Or could you compare it between gross and net?
Ma'am, is gross income the income that you earn before any deductions?
Lovely, awesome. Okay, good. So gross is your income before deductions. Very basic. Before deductions. Right, deductions include, and I'm just sort of giving you little tidbits of information here because it is important to know these things. Deductions include UIF, pension, certain companies, if you, I was going somewhere with that statement and obviously it's completely left my brain. Oh, some companies give you deductions if, let's say, for example, you've loaned money from your company or whatever the case is and you're paying it off, they will deduct that immediately. Some companies have pension funds and retirement funds. That'll be those sort of deductions. But basically any money that comes off before you are then paid. So again, another little tidbit of information. When you are one day offered a job, your job salary offer will be the gross income. So it's always important to know what your deductions are from your actual gross income so that you know what you're taking home. That's called take-home pay or net salary. Your net salary will always be less because of the fact there are certain compulsory deductions. UIF, employees have to pay, and employers. Pension, it's recently, I don't know how many of you are like up to date with these sort of financial things, but recently the government has made like pension funds compulsory for everyone to be a part of. And so you have to have pension deducted off your salary. All right, but yes, gross income is your income before any deductions. 2 marks for quite literally saying 3 words. We do like full sentences, but it's also not the end of the world. Okay, 2.3.2 says, show by calculation that a person who was 75 years and older, okay, so now they're throwing us an age. That wasn't very good English. I do apologize. They're throwing us, I said it again. Who was 75 years and older and earned 151,100 Rand during the 2022 year paid no tax. Right, let's discuss why this might be the case. First things first, the older you get, the more rebates you get, so the more money back you get. And so what that means is that when you start to calculate tax, because you get more money back, there's the potential that you're obviously going to pay a lot less tax or even no tax. The amount of money that you earn in a year, and this question actually wasn't super clear, they should have said 151,100 Rand annually. Okay, so this is an annual amount. The amount that you earn also determines how much tax you pay. So if you look at your tax tables, the more you earn, the more tax you pay. You can see these percentages increasing as you earn more and more. And so if you are not earning a huge amount of money, you're not going to pay a huge amount of tax. So let's see what happens. This person got 151,100 Rand in a year. So that means that they fall in this first tax bracket. So they only pay 18% of their annual income for tax. So we would have to work out 18% of the 151,100. Obviously, I forgot the 1. Silly me. And that gives you 27,198 Rand. Cool. So that is how much tax they currently owe. However, they are 75 years and older. So this person, whoever they are, gets some rebates. They get the primary rebate, the secondary rebate, as well as the tertiary rebate, because they are 75 years and older. They get all 3 rebates. So we are going to deduct from that, because remember, rebate is money back, the 15,714, let's do this, plus the 8,613, plus the 2,871 Rand. All of that gets deducted off their income tax. And so this total amount from this bracket, do this. So that's the tax that they currently owe. We're going to subtract all of those rebates. All of those rebates total up to 27,198 Rand. And so they end up with 0 Rand that they have to pay in tax. And that is just sort of the reality for some people. If you're below a certain threshold, you don't end up paying tax. And if you are older, you get more rebates, and so you don't end up paying tax. Now, if you look at this working out that we've just done, it's not actually a whole lot, but that was a 5-mark question, right? So again, if we have a look at the mark allocation, technology is not my friend today. Sorry, guys. you're obviously going to get a mark for getting the 18% of the annual income and getting that amount in tax. You are then going to get a mark for applying all 3 of the rebates because they're 75 years and older. You get a mark for understanding that you have to subtract the rebates, and you get a mark for obviously your final answer of 0 Rand, so they pay no tax. All right, so this was just a question testing your understanding of rebates and how they work. Right, any questions before we have a look at 2.3.3 for 8 marks?
No, ma'am.
Okay, cool. So just remember, rebates are additive or cumulative. The older you are, you get more and more of the rebates. All right, so this is where things get fun. Calculate Ms. Nande's annual tax payable. Now, sometimes we scaffold it for you. So when I say scaffold, I mean sometimes we'll start with determine her annual gross income. Determine the pension that or the non-taxable monthly pension amount. Determine the rebate that she has to pay. But this question, they've just said, sink or swim, go for it. And this is where this flow diagram becomes super useful for us. And we're going to follow these steps. Some of them might apply, some of them won't. It depends on the scenario, but we're going to follow these steps. So step number 1 is you need to calculate the annual gross income. You need to calculate how much this person is earning every single year that they have to pay tax on. Right, so we were told that she earns 39,486 Rand per month. And we know that it is for a 12-month period. That is 1 year. And so we're going to times this by 12. Like I said, your tax tables are annual amounts. You have to work with annual values. So when we multiply that by 12, we get that in a year, she earns a gross income of 473,832 Rand. So this is step 1 done. We've determined the gross annual income. So step 1. Right. Step 2 is we need to work out her pension. Now remember, it says very specifically for us, it's non-taxable. She does not pay tax on it. Now guys, your pension is always calculated, excuse me, on your gross income. Now you've got 2 ways that you can do this. My advice though, because you have to work annually, go and use this annual amount. Alternatively, you could work out 7.5% of the monthly gross salary and then times that by 12. But as long as you remember, you always need an annual value, you're good. So we're now going to determine pension. So this was 7.5% of our annual income, which was 740. Where am I getting 700 from? Sure. 473,832. Clearly, my brain has just had a time. Again, non-taxable pension. We do not pay tax on it, so we have to deduct it at some point. Right, 7.5% of that amount is 35,537 Rand 40 cents. Sorry, that handwriting was a bit suspect. Right, so we've calculated the pension. We're going to do the subtraction in a second. We now need to work out the annual taxable income. Okay, apparently I was trying to underline. Your annual taxable income is, the gross annual income minus your pension. That's all it is. Deduct the pension and you're good. So now we're going to go and work out, like I say, your taxable income. And we're going to take the 473,832 Rand, take off the amount that is not going to be taxed for my pension, 35,537 Rand 40 cents. And we get our taxable income, the amount of our income that we pay tax on. Right, and when you deduct that, you get 438,294 Rand 60 cents. Okay, this is now the amount that we pay tax on. And this is the amount that we now go decide which bracket it falls into. Right, so let's grab a nice bright color here. We now need to decide which bracket that amount falls into. So have a look at those 7 brackets. Which tax bracket does Ms. Nande's taxable income fall into?
Bracket 3.
3.
Nice. Okay, good. So tax bracket 3. You can now ignore everything else in this table. You know which bracket you're in, you're sorted. So now that we have got which tax bracket she is in rather, we can now move into step 4, which is to use that tax bracket's formula and go and work out her annual tax. So we're going to move to step 4 here. And guys, quite literally just write the formula down. So it is 70,532 Rand plus 31% of the taxable income above 337,800. Now, all you do, don't let that confuse you, is you take this taxable income that you've just worked out, 438,294.60 cents, and you subtract the amount that's given in the table, the 337,800. That subtraction tells you how much more you've earned than 337,800, but that's all you do. Okay, you take your taxable income and you subtract the amount given in your table, and that's going to give us our income tax. Now, you can, if you want to, go and do step-by-step calculations, but again, just type this whole thing into your calculator. If you're not super comfortable with that, then rather do it step-by-step. So do the subtraction first, then work out 31% of that value, and then add the 70,532 Rand. Otherwise, just throw the whole thing into your calculator. There's no need to go step-by-step. And so if you go ahead and do that, you're not going to get marks for step-by-step. That's what I'm saying. There's no need. If you go and do that calculation, you get 101,685 Rand, 33 cents. Okay, that's if you type that whole thing into your calculator. Just remember the brackets and remember the percentage. You will then be fine. So this is how much tax she currently owes. So we've used the tax table. We've calculated her annual tax. However, she's going to get money back because she is paying tax. Well done her. She gets a rebate. So step 5, we now subtract our rebate. So 101,685.33 cents minus the rebate or rebates she qualifies for. Now, because she's only 53, she only gets a deduction of 15,714 Rand. And that gives us 85,971 Rand, 33 cents. So that rebate takes it down a nice amount. Okay, I don't know. I feel like 101,000 looks quite scary. 85,000 still sort of like, oh my gosh, I have to pay all this money. But it's a little better. So now we've subtracted our primary rebate. If there was medical aid that we needed to consider, so like I said earlier, if I had said Ms. Nande is on her medical aid and has 4 dependents or whatever the case was, and I'd given you that information in your medical aid table, you would just go and subtract it. Thank you for being part of a medical aid. Here's some money back. We would do that. In this case, that doesn't apply. And what we now have is the annual tax payable. So this is her annual tax that she is owed, that is due by her to SARS. Now, sometimes, every now and then, they'll throw in a little spanner, and instead of saying annual tax payable, they would say monthly tax payable. This is one of those deductions also that comes off your paycheck. If they had asked for monthly, because you've got the annual amount, all you need to do is divide this by 12. Okay, and that would give you your monthly income tax, which would be some value. $7,164.28, which is a little bit more palatable than 85,000 Rand. So every single month off her paycheck, her employer is going to deduct that 7,164 Rand to pay to SARS on her behalf. What is quite nice is that your primary employer will always pay your tax for you, or should be paying your tax for you, same as they should be contributing to UIF for you. And so it's very rarely something you ever need to stress about unless you own your own business or work multiple jobs or anything like that. Then you have to accommodate for all that tax. All right, but we have worked out the annual taxable income. The annual tax payable. It is a lot of steps, but this is why this little flow diagram is so useful, because if you remember the steps, when they throw a question like this at you for 8 marks, it's not scary. You go step by step and you do all of these things. Right, it was an 8 marker, which is, like I say, this is one of the highest mark allocations you're going to see. There was one, I think it was paper 2 of 2020. There was like a 9 marker, which threw everyone, but never really more than 8 or 9. Okay, so just so you know, you get a mark for determining the annual gross income. So remember, this was annual gross. Everything has to be annual. You're going to get a mark for understanding to work out the 7.5% and then getting the pension amount. You're going to get a mark for deducting your pension amount and getting your annual taxable income. Income. Right, then you actually move into your tax tables. So you get a mark for substituting into the correct tax bracket. You get a mark then for simplifying, essentially putting it into your calculator and simplifying, and a mark for that answer. So this is kind of a 2 marker over here. How many marks have I got? 4, 5, 6, 7. That seems a little ridiculous. Yes, no, I'm right. And then you get a mark for subtracting your rebate. Okay, so that is your 8 marks. Getting through all of those steps and getting your annual tax payable to SARS. Like I say, sometimes we're nice and we kind of lead you into it. First, work out the gross annual income, determine the pension, whatever, but often they're not. And I don't know why they aren't nicer to you guys, especially for income tax, which is a section that many struggle with, which sucks. But this is why this little flow diagram is so useful. If you follow those steps, you're good. Okay, you can then do any income tax situation that they throw at you. And even if you get a bit stuck, you have done the appropriate calculations for yourself to get 6 of those 8 marks or 5 of those 8 marks or whatever the case is. So like I said, even if you get stuck, you've given yourself specific things that you know you need to calculate that you're going to get marks for. All right, any questions about this income tax?
No, ma'am.
No,
Okay,
ma'am.
do we feel a bit better about income tax?
Yes, ma'am. I think the flow diagram actually helps a lot.
Okay, awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, cool. Nice. Okay, so I mean, honestly, guys, I'm going to be real honest here. I made the flow diagram for myself when I first started teaching maths like years ago. I made it for myself because like you guys have said, like it's not an easy thing to just, oh yeah, I understand income tax. It doesn't work like that. So I made the flow diagram so that I understood what was going on. And then I was like, oh, cool, this is actually quite helpful. Maybe I should share it with my kids. And it really does help. And like I say, even if you don't get to a final answer or you get a bit lost somewhere along the way, you've then done those calculations. You can bank on. I mean, if I think about if you've just worked out annual gross, the pension, and your taxable income, you've got 50% of the marks. That's better than losing all 8 marks. So the flow diagram is super, super useful when it comes to income tax. Right, I'm fully aware of the fact that I've taken up more time than was allocated for me, so I do apologize. What I will do is I will put this little flow diagram onto the Google Classroom as well, but I will just wait here in case you want to screenshot this. I'll put the flow diagram onto Google Classroom because I think it is useful, and then you can sit with it next to past paper questions as you go through. But thank you so much for joining. Guys, you've been really awesome. Like, I really enjoyed this hour and a half. I hope it was helpful for you guys. I really do. And then next week, we're going to be doing some data handling. Data handling is not hard, but sometimes they give us really ugly numbers that we need to work with. So it is important that we practice it. And then we'll move into paper 2 stuff. I'll wait another minute or two if anyone has any